bases. And here we go. This is what I'm talking about. Fantasy now has put up his starport with the add-on, and he's going to be getting dropships probably pretty soon. I would imagine would be what he's going for there. And he also has a lot of Goliaths, so those are going to be able to attack any enemy dropships from Light. They haven't shown Light's base in a while, so I don't know if Light has a starport up. It looks like they're looking around here right now, and it doesn't look like Light does have a starport, so he's going to be behind in the dropship count, and that is going to matter when we go into more of the later game for sure. Fantasy is pushing up a little bit here. It looks like Light's tanks sieging way too late, and Fantasy's unsieged tanks are going to get in there, but Light does have some backup tanks, so Fantasy's going to have to back off a little bit. Looks like they're going to probably start setting up this line, kind of not in the middle of the map, but kind of that line of defense where one player can't cross without having a significant siege tank advantage, or else losing a lot of siege tanks of his own. Light still has that advantage of having more vultures on the ground, and this is where it comes into play right here. Being able to basically harass these bases, cause a lot of Fantasy's probe or SCVs to have to come off the line. However, Fantasy's going to clean this up pretty quick. He did scan, he did take out the mines, and now his vultures and tanks, or excuse me, Goliath and tanks are going to be able to fend off those vultures pretty easily. Fantasy already has 2 dropships out, so we'll see how he uses those. He's probably going to go for harass on his own. However, Light has a lot of tanks now here in the middle, so he's going to be able to push back Fantasy. I think both players would do well to maybe try to put up a turret. It's kind of hard to build turrets out in that middle area because there is some unbuildable ground out there. But right now they're both having to scan a lot and to see each other's tanks. Now they do both have 3 command centers, so if they do have the scanner sweep on all 3 command centers or the ComSat station, it won't be too big of a deal, but still I'm a little surprised that neither of them has put up any turrets to try to get more of a hard defensive line, defensive position. Science facility now going up for Fantasy. It'll be interesting to see if Fantasy's getting just that science facility for those extra upgrades, or if he's actually going to try to do some kind of quick battle cruiser or something like that. That's a little too early, I guess, to say that, but looks like Fantasy is moving in here. He does have a couple dropships. He's going to try to get on the second expansion of Lights. Wow, a lot of Goliaths in there, a couple tanks sieging, so that's going to take all the SCVs off mines. While the SCVs are coming back to get minerals again still, which isn't a smart play by Light. Light being a little careless there. That command center could easily go down depending on how this plays out. It looks like it is going to go down unless Light can do something quick to take out the siege tanks of Fantasy. And Fantasy drops actually a Goliath there, taking out the tanks. Wow, good job by Fantasy to pick up his Goliaths and then redrop them over the siege tanks. And I think that command center is going to go down. It's still, no, maybe it's not going to go down. Light does reinforce and barely saves his command center in time, but still that was some critical mining time lost. And it looks like Fantasy is starting to gain a little bit of positional advantage with that. And now he's building his 4th command center, 3rd expansion. We'll see what Light is doing, but I still haven't seen any dropships for Light, so he's definitely behind the dropship count. That's going to be huge in this game. That's probably a pretty big mistake for Light. Considering they started off with very even builds in the beginning, Light kind of didn't choose to get that starport till later on, and that's going to hurt him now later on in the game. Fantasy also using those dropships for scouting. Siege tanks do have a longer range than they're able to see, so by using those dropships, those tanks are able to see farther, basically to their maximal range potential. And so that's going to, again, be an advantage for Fantasy, that his tanks are going to be able to have that extended range without having to use scans at all, whereas Light is going to have to rely on his scans until he gets dropships of his own. Looks like Light lost his barracks probably to a couple of Goliaths. Now he's having to rebuild his barracks before he's able to build any more factories. A lot of positioning going on. Light just trying to move out with some tanks and edge forward on the map as opposed to getting locked into his base. It looks like he does have the superior tank force. However, Fantasy has the mobility advantage. So that's the difference we're looking at here. Light having probably a couple, maybe a factory or 2 more than Fantasy, but not having the starport. And wow, that starport just now going up. I can't believe that's the first starport, but it looks like it is. Light sieging a little bit on Fantasy's ridge there, but that's not going to do too much. And just a lot of expansions that was that 4th expansion Fantasy I built earlier. Now moving over to that base. Again, probably going to be a really long game here. Neither player being too aggressive, just trying to get a positional advantage and do a little bit of economic harass if they can. And again, I still think that Fantasy, even though he has a less siege tank count, well, it looks like Light is going here with siege tanks. He has a lot more siege tanks than Fantasy. Fantasy's a little bit out of position with his forces because all his forces are in his dropships. It probably could have been a wise move to move his dropships over those tanks and siege on the tanks, but he decided not to do that. So a little bit safe play by Fantasy. He probably could have been a little more aggressive there, but he's, I guess, just giving up the position to Light a little bit. So you can see on the minimap, Light has pushed out that siege tank line a little bit farther now, and all those siege tanks moving across the field. Meanwhile, it looks like an expansion going up for Light, and it looks like a 5th expansion, I think, going up for Fantasy. So Fantasy definitely trying to get ahead in the economic game. However, because he's rendered so much space to Light, Light's, even though he doesn't have the dropships, does have his ability to put up all those tanks across the map and take a good map position. Meanwhile, Fantasy is going to try to use this advantage probably here and try to do some drops. So he's moving around his forces, looking like he's maybe going to set up for a drop, maybe not. He's just putting up his line there, defending his bases. Light getting one siege tank there on the ridge to try to get that upper advantage, that 1/3 mischance that will be in his favor. Looks like Light trying to move in with his siege tanks. He didn't scan. He didn't see that Fantasy already has his siege tanks in position. And wow! Now Fantasy dropping all his Goliaths again. This is what we're talking about with that mobility advantage. It looks like Light did clean it up, but having those dropships is key because you can drop them basically using Goliaths like a Protoss player would use Zealots and do Zealot bombs. It's basically the same thing. You drop Goliaths on top of the other player's tanks, and those tanks are going to basically be shooting themselves. So yes, they'll kill off the enemy's Goliaths, but you'll also take a lot of damage from your own tanks. And effectively, it's more effective for the person dropping the Goliaths on top in most cases, as long as they do the drop correctly. Looks like Light does also have his 5th expansion, or well, 4th expansion, 5th mining base. So the map is now completely cut in half. Totally. Both players having a good sense of when to expand and both expanding at the same time. Again, though, I think the later this game goes, the more dropships Fantasy's going to have, and in the end, that's going to be a huge advantage for him. It'll be interesting to see if any player switches to battle cruisers, but it's probably not going to happen for a while. Fantasy trying to go in for a drop here, but it gets spotted by the engineering bay, and Light's going to see this coming. We'll see how he reacts, but I don't think Light has any forces close to this. Okay, Light does have some forces close to this, and he has dropships of his own. Fantasy, meanwhile, sieging up here, but he's going to get surrounded by Light, and I don't think it's going to be too effective. Light's going to take down all these forces pretty easily. Yes, he has a largely significant force of tanks and Goliaths, so that was totally stopped by Light. So good job of Light by scouting that with Engineering Bay and taking that out. A lot of SCVs transferring to a base up here, which isn't actually mined yet, or there isn't actually a command center there yet. Again, those bases aren't fully up for Light or Fantasy, but they both have 5, let's see, 1, 2, 3, maybe 6 bases now. Actually, yeah, Light was putting up his 6th base there, and Fantasy is also putting up his 6th base. Actually, it's already up. So it's hard for me to tell who's economically ahead. It looks like Light is now putting up his double armories to try to get those extra upgrades. Again, I think Fantasy's been upgrading this whole time, and Fantasy did have that early science facility, so I still think he's going to be ahead in upgrades. I'll try to get a view of the upgrades here in a second, because I should have done that actually probably a long time ago. Meanwhile, though, big attack coming in from Fantasy, removing all his forcers, just trying to get that position. Let's see if they click at any of these units. Let's see. It looks like he's got only one attack upgrade for Light. Let's see what Fantasy has. Yeah, I think that's 0-1. I can't see if that's 1-1. I think it's 0-1 for Light. We'll see what upgrades Fantasy has when they click on Fantasy's tanks. Fantasy trying to get a little bit of position here on that expansion. But again, I do think that both players are kind of just posturing and really just trying. I think this guy's sleeping because he's bored. The Terran vs. Terran play is so boring and nothing's going on, so he's sleeping over there. There's that science facility floating around for Fantasy. Actually going to provide a good spot again, so that those tanks can get farther range and going to be able to range that command center. So smart play there. He's not upgrading anything on the science facility, so he can just kind of float that around. And it looks like both players just cutting the map in half. Now some turrets going up, as I had mentioned earlier. A lot more turrets going up, basically to be in a defensive position against dropships. Wow, that command center almost going completely down. Now Light is just sacrificing his SCV so that he can meanwhile move his siege tanks a little bit up. It looks like it is working. Siege tanks do have range on those tanks now of Fantasies, so Light's going to be able to kill off those tanks and reclaim that command center. Giant Force out, and wow, here's a switch. Here's a switch. Fantasy making the first switch, and Fantasy has three armories, so probably upgrading air weapons in those armories, and he's going to make that first switch to battlecruisers. However, the science facility is up for Light too, so Light might be thinking about making a switch, and yes, here it is. Wow, both players at the exact same time putting up their starports to make that switch to battlecruisers. It'd be interesting to see. I don't know if Light was planning that already, or if he just scanned Fantasy and said, oh crap, he saw those starports